All right. So when I was approached by Saint Gobain to curate the architectural website called FutureSpaces, I thought there must be a way of thinking about architecture in this country, and so I thought that perhaps we could look at it in terms of identity, in terms of legacy, in terms of memory, in terms of security, and in terms of ethics, because I believe all of those aspects are influencing the architecture today and the architects of today. And so the very first set of chapters was on identity, and the first focus was on personal identity. I realized that with students that it's difficult once they leave this university to retain their own personal design identity with all of the influences that exist out there, all the pressures from economics all the way through to the client, to the problems that recur when drawings have to be submitted to the local authority, for instance. And I identified an architect that I thought whose work was representative of continued personal identity that was then merged with an understanding of place and an understanding of culture, and that architect was Nina Moritz. And what I was trying to exhibit in my discussions on her work was that over time, she's a very principled person, but over time she's managed to retain her own personal design identity, but managed to merge that with the cultural aspects of her place that she works in, Namibia, and also the ethics of architecture, in her case mainly environmental aspects. And I thought that that was a good way of making architecture, so that one doesn't lose one's own personal design identity, but at the same time one takes cognizance of other ones without being subsumed by them. The second one was academic identity, and here I was reflecting on when I was a student that the work that I remember seeing from different universities was very different. There was a noticeable formalism, I suppose, in what was produced by one university and by another, and one could recognize the outputs of those universities. And I started to think about today, and is that still the case, and if so, should it be the case? And so through two exhibitions, the Korobik exhibition and then the Gifa exhibition, I went to look at the work, and I noticed that there wasn't this distinction anymore. That I looked at all the work and I couldn't really identify whether it came from WITS or UCT or even Pretoria. And then I got to thinking, is that a problem? Is that something which should be addressed, or is it a good thing? The realization came to me that perhaps there was an earnestness in the students' work and a maturity in the students' work of today that didn't rely on formalism, which was the case in my day. And I'm generalizing, I know, but there was a definite formalism which came from UCT as opposed to any other university. And that wasn't present in the work that I saw at Korobik. So it was probably for me the result of the earnestness of the students dealing with particular issues of today and being serious about those issues. But on the other hand, the only identity that was recognizable was the fact that the work all looked the same. I mean, perhaps it's to do with the presentation techniques of today, the Photoshop techniques, the laser cutting of models, so that work all looks the same, even though the issues may be different and the approaches may be different and the forms may be different, but the way they're presented seem to be the same. That is, of course, a question that one could ask, is that appropriate or isn't it appropriate, and what should be done about it? And then the last set of identities refer to what I call the iconic nature of architecture, and whether that is a good thing or whether that is a bad thing. I question formal identity and I question iconic architecture. So for instance, the work of people like Richard Meyer or Daniel Libeskind to an extent even, and Frank Gehry, architects whose work exists in different places in the world but it all looks the same. And is that an appropriate way of making architecture is for me a major question. So I started thinking about architects like Harvey Fagan or Alvaro Siza in Portugal, and Meccano, whose recent building in the Netherlands exhibits a different way of making an architecture which is still recognizable. It's still iconic, but it's very much related to place and very much related to the personal identity of the architect. And I thought that perhaps that was a way that we could think about making architecture. And the architecture that I used as an example was Morphosis in New York and in Los Angeles, the work that I visited last year. More so perhaps in New York than in Los Angeles. There is an understanding of place, there's an understanding of context, there's an understanding of the human condition and how those architectures relate to that. but yet there's still a formal identity recognizable. You can still recognize the hand of the architect, but it is subsumed in an understanding of place and of the inhabitants of that place.